My name is Eleanor Hayes, I am 77 years old, and I have buried 2 husbands, raised 1 son, and tended a piece of red, stubborn earth that fed 3 generations. I learned to sign my name on a cotton-soft receipt the day my father gave me that land, and I made a quiet promise that no one would take it while my heart still remembered the rhythm of rain on tin roofs. Today, in a crowded real estate office that smelled like lemon polish and paper dust, I watched a young clerk slide a fraudulent deed across a glass desk and congratulate my son, Thomas, and his wife Julia, on selling my land for a small fortune, just as I walked in alive. Would you like to know what happened when the dead came to collect her signature? The office went silent the way a field goes silent before the hawk drops its shadow, and I saw Thomas freeze with the pen raised midair, his mouth open like a trap that suddenly remembered its teeth. Julia gripped her handbag so tightly the gold chain cut her skin, and a small bead of blood bloomed like a punctuation mark she never wanted to read. The clerk blinked, looked at the photograph on the old deed, the one with my younger face squinting at sunlight, and then back at my living eyes which were not ready to forgive. Can you imagine the taste of dust when the truth finally lands on your tongue? "Good morning," I said, steady as a river stone. "I heard there was a woman here signing as me." The clerk's chair squealed backward, Thomas stammered, and Julia pressed her nails into the paper, leaving half-moons by my forged name. The air felt charged, like the moment before thunder argues with the roof. Do you know the sound a lie makes when it realizes the truth has a voice? I moved closer and laid my hand beside the signature. They had tried to imitate the flourish my father teased me about, the looping E, the stubborn tail on the R. But the strokes were too smooth, too certain, like someone who has never trembled for a thing. My real signature was born from hands that hauled water and lifted grandchildren. My real signature carried the small tremors of a life lived without cushion. Could they ever mimic a lifetime of calluses? Mother," Thomas said, swallowing the word as if it scratched his throat. "We thought," well, Julia's cousin said, "this is just a formality." He couldn't look directly at me. He kept fixing his gaze on the window where a sliver of the city blinked, pretending the street would tell him the lines to say. Don't you wonder what excuses children rehearse when they forget who taught them to speak? Julia found her voice before my son did. "Mrs. Hayes, we only acted because you were unwell and the medical bills." Her words floated like soap bubbles, colorful, delicate, easily burst. She was wearing a navy blazer too new to be honest, and a perfume that smelled like a promise made in an elevator. Have you ever noticed how false kindness has a sweeter scent than truth? The clerk, a man with careful hair and nervous fingers, slowly reached for the phone. He glanced at the security camera, then at the brass plaque with the managing partner's name. "Ma'am," he said to me, in the tone people use with very old women or ticking clocks, "if you are Eleanor Hayes, may I see an ID?" I handed him my worn card with a photograph taken on a happy day. He stared, compared, swallowed, and then his lips formed a thin line. Can a single piece of plastic feel heavier than a mountain when it decides which way the world will tilt? Thomas nudged the deed with his knuckle as if he could nudge time itself, as if the last 10 minutes might slink backward into a place where I didn't exist. "Mom, we can talk at home," he whispered, a boy again, the same boy who used to hide behind my skirt when the rooster chased him. But I wasn't a skirt anymore. I was the whole house standing. Do you see how quickly a child forgets the roof that kept him dry? "Not at home," I said softly. "Here." I looked at the clerk. "Call the police." The word police slid across the glass like a cold wind, and everyone in that office exhaled at once, the way a room sighs when a storm finally opens its mouth. Isn't it strange how justice is quiet until it isn't? Julia's eyes flashed. "You wouldn't put your own son through that," she said, her voice a tremor wrapped in velvet. "Think of your legacy." "Legacy," she said, as if legacy was something you could fold into a bank envelope and count under fluorescent light. Legacy, when legacy is actually made of afternoons and apologies and the way you hold your tongue when your child is learning how to use his. What did she think legacy cost? More or less than a mother's sleep? I turned my face toward Thomas. His jaw worked, his hands opened and closed. "Why?" asked him. It was a small word, but it carried a lifetime of laundry lines, school fees, and the way I used to cut his sandwiches diagonally because he liked the triangles best. My question went looking for the boy who used to run barefoot to the mango tree, not this man who had learned to hide bills in new suit pockets. Where do good boys go when greed rents their bones? He tried to meet my eyes, failed, then stared at the signature again, as if the ink itself might testify in his favor. We were drowning, he said. The mortgage, the car, Julia's business. His voice thinned on that last word. Business, a cape thrown over a wilderness. Once upon a time, drowning meant a river. Now it meant a showroom and a phone plan. How does a man forget that it was a woman with muddy ankles who taught him to swim? My fingers tapped the deed, once, twice, like a judge learning the rhythm of a sentence. The clerk murmured into the phone. A woman at another desk pretended to rearrange paperclips, but I saw her listening, saw how her own mouth pressed tight as if she were holding back a word she'd been taught not to say. Shame. Do offices keep extra paperclips for days like this? The door chimed, letting in the warm breath of the city. Somewhere outside, a bus sighed and a child laughed, and I felt the tender ache of a world that keeps moving even when your heart wants to stop and count what it is losing. I thought of my land, the stubborn red earth, the narrow path where my late husband used to whistle, the mango tree that never failed us even in dry season. That land had paid for teeth and textbooks, for wedding rice and funeral cloth. Did my son think a signature could sell the sound of his father's whistle? Julia tried again, softening her voice to honey. We planned to tell you after, Mrs. Hayes. We planned to give you the best room in our new house. There it was, the glittering promise with a rotten core. The best room is not a gift you offer to the woman who built the house in you. Could she not hear the echo of her own emptiness? I looked at Thomas one more time, at the tired fear in him, and I felt something inside me tip and settle. There is a line a mother can forgive, and there is a line a mother must protect. My father's thumbprint lived in my memory, heavy and warm on the day he pressed the deed into my palm. I would not be the one to let that warmth go cold. When did we begin to call betrayal a necessary expense? Officer, the clerk said, rising as two uniformed cops stepped in. Their radios crackled, small metal birds chattering about other storms. The younger one took in the scene in a single glance. The trembling pen, the trembling son, the old woman who would not tremble for anyone. Do you know the look a person gives when they realize the story has already chosen its ending? Ma'am, the older officer said to me. Is this your land? He nodded. Is that your signature? I let the question hang between us like a wet shirt on a line. Heavy, undeniable. I shook my head. The room adjusted itself to the weight of my answer. Isn't it astonishing how quickly a liar becomes a child again in the face of a simple no? Julia reached for Thomas's arm, a reflex that said partner even when the ship is sinking. We can fix this, she hissed. Fix like a button that popped during dinner, like a nail that needed tapping. But this wasn't a button. This was the seam of the family. When a seam tears at the heart, what thread is strong enough to hold? The younger officer asked for the deed, examined the signature, then my ID. He cleared his throat. We'll need formal statements, he said, already gesturing for the second officer to move behind Thomas and Julia. The metal glint of handcuffs winked at the fluorescent lights, casual as spoons. Can a sound be both gentle and final, the way cuffs click on the wrists of someone you love? Thomas looked at me then, truly looked, and I saw it. The way the sea is in a boy's eyes right before he learns it can't carry him anymore. Mom, he whispered, and for a heartbeat I wanted to run back in time and lift him onto my hip, kiss the salt from his cheek, tell him the world is kinder than it is. But my land had taught me something. Seeds don't lie about what they've been given. Didn't I teach him that harvest comes from honest planting? The officers guided them toward the door. Julia's heels ticked on the tile like a clock whose hands had finally remembered how to move. The clerk stood with his pen hovering midair, unsure whether to write the end of this page or start a new one. I stood still, steady as fence posts determined to hold their line. Have you ever felt the ground itself choose you? As they reached the threshold, the older officer paused. "Mrs. Hayes, you'll be needed at the precinct to confirm your statement and ownership." I nodded, and my bones answered for me, ancient and firm. Then Thomas twisted back, tears standing unshed. "Please," he said, "don't do this." His voice was the lonely sound of a door trying to close against a wind it never learned to respect. Can mercy and justice walk side by side without stepping on each other's toes? The hallway waited, a narrow river of light. The officers stepped forward with their quiet, practiced patience. The office exhaled again, a fabric unwrinkling. I reached into my bag, felt the cold spine of the original deed I had carried for decades in a weathered folder, and slid it onto the glass. My name in trembled truth, my father's thumbprint faint as a blessing. How many times must a woman prove she is the thing she says she is? The cuffs hovered, the pen hovered, the room hovered, between what we had been and what we would become after this moment. Then a voice I knew far too well drifted in from the doorway, breathless, urgent, and carrying a new bruise I hadn't seen before. It was my granddaughter, Lily, with fear shining in her face like a mirror no one wanted to look into. "Grandma," she gasped, "you don't know what else they did." And as the officers turned and the door chimed again, the room held its breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "Would you like to hear what shattered the floor next?" Lily's words cracked the air like dry wood snapping in fire. "Grandma, you don't know what else they did," she whispered again, this time her voice breaking under the weight of something too big for a young girl to carry alone. Everyone froze. The officers, the clerk, even Thomas and Julia with their wrists already kissed by cold metal. It was as if the walls leaned forward to hear the confession trembling in her chest. What else could be worse than stealing from blood? I turned to my granddaughter, her curls messy, her school sweater pulled inside out, and her eyes wide with fear. "Tell me, child," I urged gently, though my own voice trembled. She took a step closer, clutching the strap of her school bag like it was her only shield. They tried to sell the house too. Home. They already showed people around, strangers, Grandma. People walked through your bedroom like you were already gone. Her words dripped like acid into the silence, each one burning away the thin cloth of excuses Thomas and Julia had been wearing. How many times can a child witness betrayal before her childhood is stolen too? Julia gasped, pulling against the officer's grip. "She's lying. That girl doesn't know what she's saying." Her voice was sharp, desperate, but even the officer holding her arm gave her a look that said he wasn't convinced. Thomas's face drained of color. He kept his eyes low, as though the floor might open and swallow him. And yet, wasn't it his own digging that had prepared the hole? "Lily," I said carefully, "who told you this?" She shook her head. "I saw them. They made me stay in the kitchen when those people came, but I heard everything. They said you were too weak to live long. They laughed, Grandma." The word laughter stung worse than fire. To laugh over your mother's death while her blood still runs in your veins. Isn't that the cruelest music the world can play? One of the officers cleared his throat, scribbling notes on a small pad. "Ma'am," he said to me, "we'll need you to verify ownership of the house as well. If what the girl says is true, this is more than a single fraud attempt." His tone was steady, but I saw the flicker in his eyes, the recognition of rot spreading deeper than expected. Can you imagine how betrayal feels when it multiplies right before your eyes? Thomas finally raised his head. His lips trembled as if he wanted to speak, but no words came out. His silence screamed louder than Julia's protests. "Why, Thomas?" I whispered, voice heavy with the dust of years. "Why tear down the roof that sheltered you?" He flinched, and in that moment, he was not a grown man in his 40s but a boy who had once hidden behind my skirts when thunder cracked the sky. When did that boy vanish? Did greed swallow him whole, or did I fail to hold him close enough? Julia, seeing his weakness, tried to seize control again. "You don't understand, Mrs. Hayes. We had no choice. Debts were crushing us. Do you want your son to go to prison? Do you want your grandchildren to suffer because of your stubbornness over a piece of land and an old house? Her words struck with venom, meant to twist guilt into my bones. But how could she speak of grandchildren's suffering when she was the architect of their pain? Isn't it strange how thieves wrap their crimes in cloth stitched with pity? The younger officer stepped closer. "Ma'am, it's time. We'll need all of you at the precinct. This has gone beyond a misunderstanding." He guided Thomas toward the door. My son's shoulders sagged like broken gates, his face pale with the weight of what he'd built against me. Julia hissed at him under her breath, a snake striking in its last corner. And Lily, sweet Lily, slipped her hand into mine, her small fingers trembling but determined. She had become my anchor when the waves were rising. Isn't it remarkable how the youngest often become the strongest when storms come? We stepped out into the hallway, the cool air brushing against us. People had gathered, curious faces peering over desks, strangers whispering about betrayal, about family, about greed. Every whisper felt like a stone thrown into the pond of my soul, rippling with shame and sorrow. I wanted to bury my face, but I kept it high. If I bent, the whole story would break. How heavy is a mother's dignity when her child has traded it for coins? As the officers led us to the waiting patrol car, Lily tugged at my sleeve. "Grandma," she whispered, tears brimming, "there's something else I haven't told you yet. Something worse." I turned sharply, heart pounding. Worse than selling land. Worse than showing our house to strangers while planning my death. Her small lips trembled as she leaned closer, her voice low so only I could hear. "They already took money from your bank account. They forged papers to drain it. And Grandma, someone helped them from the inside." Her words hit me like cold water poured over fire. I stumbled, gripping her tighter. Inside help. My chest ached with the weight of betrayal expanding like smoke in a closed room. Who else had my son entangled in this net of deceit? A bank clerk? A lawyer? Or someone even closer? The car door opened with a metallic groan, the officers waiting. Julia muttered curses under her breath. Thomas kept silent, and Lily looked at me with eyes pleading for truth to finally triumph. My land, my house, my savings, all stolen in the shadow of my supposed death. But the question that burned hotter than all the rest was simple. If there was someone else helping them, who was it, and how much more had already been taken from me? And just as I was about to ask Lily to explain, a voice cut through the crowd, deep and familiar, stopping me cold. It was a voice I hadn't heard in years. "Eleanor," it said firmly, almost commandingly, "we need to talk." I turned and saw him. Would you like to know who it was? The man stepping out from the shadows, holding secrets that could either save me or shatter everything. The crowd parted like a river forced to make way for a rock, and there he stood, Richard, my late husband's younger brother. His hair had thinned, his belly had grown, but those sharp gray eyes hadn't dulled one bit. I hadn't spoken to him in almost 15 years, not since he walked away from my husband's funeral with bitterness dripping from every word. And now, here he was, standing tall in the middle of my storm, as though he had been waiting for this very moment. Why do old ghosts always return when the house is burning? "Eleanor," Richard repeated, his voice calmer now, but his eyes locked on Thomas. "This mess didn't start today. It's been brewing for years." He took a slow step forward, and even the officers hesitated, watching the way his presence seemed to pull the air tighter. My son shrank back, and Julia's face twisted into something between shock and fury. What secret tied them to this man who once swore never to step foot near my family again? I steadied myself and asked the only question my soul could form. "What do you know, Richard?" My voice carried not just anger but exhaustion, the kind that comes from carrying too many betrayals on shoulders already hunched with age. He looked at me for a long time, then at Lily, sweet Lily who still clung to my hand, and his gaze softened for the briefest second. "Your son and his wife didn't plan this alone," Richard said finally. "They had help. I know because I was approached too." The words fell like stones, each one sending ripples across the room. My knees threatened to give way, but I tightened my grip on Lily's hand. Approached too. By my own blood. What could they have possibly offered him that would make betrayal seem worth it? Thomas's face burned red. "Uncle, don't," he snapped, voice cracking with desperation. "You promised." He bit his lip, realizing too late that he had already said too much. Julia shot him a look sharp enough to cut steel. Promised what? Did my own son think lies could be kept in jars, safe forever? Richard stepped closer, his voice low but clear enough for everyone to hear. "They wanted me to sign as witness, Eleanor. They said you were too old to notice, too weak to fight, and too close to death for it to matter. They offered me a share if I helped cover the paper trail. But I said no. I told them Hayes' blood doesn't eat Hayes' blood. Yet they found someone else who didn't care about the family name. Someone on the inside." His eyes flickered with something, anger, maybe regret, and then settled back on me. Can a man carry both guilt and pride in the same breath? My heart thudded painfully. "Who?" I whispered, almost too afraid to hear the answer. The silence stretched until it felt like the walls themselves were listening, waiting for a name that could split us apart forever. Before Richard could answer, Julia laughed, a high, sharp sound that didn't belong to the room we were in. "You really think you're untouchable, old woman? You think uncovering us is the end of it? You don't know half of what's been done." Her voice dripped poison, her wrists straining against the cuffs as she glared at me like a cornered snake. "How much venom can one heart produce before it rots completely?" The older officer tightened his hold on her arm. "Enough," he barked, but Julia only smirked. "Ask your dear brother-in-law where he's been these past few months. Ask him who he's been meeting with. You'll see this family isn't as clean as you pretend it is." Her words struck like arrows dipped in oil, designed not just to wound but to set fire. Was she lying to save herself, or peeling open a truth I wasn't ready to face? Richard's face darkened, and he shot Julia a look that could have flattened mountains. "Don't twist this," he growled. But in that growl I heard something else, fear. My stomach sank. Why would a man who claimed innocence sound like that when pressed? The younger officer glanced between them. "Mrs. Hayes, we'll sort this out at the station. But I suggest you listen carefully. This may go deeper than a forged deed." His words hung heavy, pulling my heart deeper into the abyss. I turned to Lily, her small hand trembling in mine, her eyes darting from Richard to her father to Julia. She looked too young to understand the full depth of betrayal, but old enough to feel its scars already marking her heart. "Grandma," she whispered, "don't trust anyone." Her warning was soft, but it cut sharper than steel. Isn't it tragic when a child learns so early that the world she depends on is built on shifting sand? The officers guided us all toward the patrol car. Julia muttered under her breath. Thomas walked like a man already dragging chains, and Richard followed, his expression unreadable. I climbed in with Lily pressed against my side, my mind spinning with too many questions. Who was the inside help? Was Richard truly innocent, or just less guilty? And what would the world look like when the full truth finally came crashing through? As the car pulled away, the city lights flickered past the window like restless ghosts. I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breath, but then I felt it. Lily's hand slipping something into my palm. I opened it discreetly and froze. It was a folded receipt from the bank, dated last week, with a withdrawal of nearly $50,000. The signature scrawled at the bottom was mine, but not mine. And at the top of the receipt, printed in black ink, was the name of the clerk who authorized it. It wasn't Richard. It was someone I trusted even more. Would you like to know whose name was staring back at me from that slip of paper? The name that nearly stopped my heart in its tracks? My breath caught in my throat as I unfolded the crumpled slip with trembling fingers. The letters swam before my eyes, cruel and undeniable, spelling out the name of someone I had trusted for decades. Margaret Lewis. My best friend. The woman who had sat beside me in church every Sunday. Who held my hand when I buried my husband. Who brought me soup when my bones ached too much to cook. Margaret, my confidante, my sister in everything but blood. How could her name be stamped in black ink beneath a forged version of my signature? The patrol car swayed gently as it moved, but inside me, the world spun like a storm let loose. I stared at the slip, my heart pounding, and I could hardly breathe. Margaret. The same Margaret who used to watch Lily after school when I was too tired. The same Margaret who once swore she'd guard my secrets as if they were her own. And yet, there her name stood bold on the paper. The authorizing hand for $50,000 stolen from my account. Isn't betrayal always the sharpest when it comes from the hands you never doubted? Grandma, do you see it? Lily whispered, her little face pale as she leaned close. I found it in Dad's drawer. He must have hidden it there. Her eyes searched mine, pleading for an explanation, for sense where there was none. I squeezed her hand tightly, though my own fingers shook. Yes, child, I murmured, my voice cracking. I see it. But how could I explain to her that the woman she called Auntie Margaret might have been the silent knife behind all of this? Julia, who had been quiet for a moment, noticed the slip in my hand. Her lips curled into a smirk. So you know now, she spat. Your precious Margaret isn't so innocent, is she? Ask her how much she's already pocketed while you wasted your time trusting her. You think betrayal only lives in your house? No, Eleanor. It's been living next door all along. Her laughter was bitter, jagged, and the officer had to shove her forward to silence her. But her words had already pierced deep, finding the softest place in my chest. I closed my eyes for a moment, memories rushing back, the two of us shelling beans together under the mango tree, Margaret wiping her brow and promising me, whatever happens, we women must hold each other up. I had believed her. Trusted her with keys, with confidences, with my very heart. And now her name was scrawled in betrayal beside my stolen money. What do you do when the person who steadied your shoulders is the same one who digs the ground from under your feet? Thomas finally spoke, his voice hoarse and desperate. Mom, please. Don't drag Margaret into this. She only helped us because I begged her. She said she didn't want to, but I told her it was the only way. Don't blame her. Blame me. He was shaking, tears brimming in his eyes. His words tumbling out like a man drowning. But guilt confessed too late still drowns the same, doesn't it? The younger officer glanced at the slip in my hand, then at Thomas. We'll have to verify this. If another name is involved, this is bigger than we thought. He scribbled something in his notebook, his jaw tight, his eyes unreadable. The older officer just sighed heavily, as though he had seen families like mine torn apart too many times before. How many mothers had sat in the back of his car, hearts breaking not from strangers' crimes but from their own children's choices. I felt Lily bury her face against my side, her small body trembling. Grandma, she whispered again, her voice muffled. Will everything be okay? The question tore me open. What does okay mean when the roof of trust has already caved in? When blood, marriage, and friendship all betray you in the same breath? I kissed her hair, whispering, as long as we hold the truth, child, we will be okay. But deep inside, I wondered if truth was enough to heal what had already shattered. The patrol car finally pulled up in front of the precinct, its gray walls rising cold and unwelcoming. The officers opened the doors, guiding us out. Julia's heels clattered angrily on the concrete. Thomas shuffled like a ghost. Richard followed silently with fists clenched, and Lily clung tighter to me than ever before. I held the slip of paper in my palm, its edges digging into my skin as though to remind me of the fresh wound carved by Margaret's name. Inside, the air smelled of paper, sweat, and old secrets. The officers led us to a small interview room, its metal chairs cold, its walls too bare, too close. They sat Thomas and Julia across the table, still cuffed, while I sat with Lily beside me. The slip of paper lay between us like a snake waiting to strike. Richard leaned against the wall, his jaw tight, his eyes watching everything with the sharpness of a hawk. Mrs. Hayes, the older officer said gently, we'll need you to give a full statement. But before we begin, do you want to tell us what that paper means to you? His eyes flicked toward the receipt on the table. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of decades pressing against my chest. "It means," I said slowly, my voice trembling but firm, "that my son's betrayal was not carried out by him and his wife alone. It means someone I trusted, someone I loved like a sister, has been helping them steal from me." My words cracked in the middle, but I forced them out. "And it means that my world is not as I believed it was." Isn't it cruel how the ground shifts most violently when you thought you were standing on solid earth? The room fell silent, each of us drowning in the heaviness of the moment. Julia smirked. Thomas lowered his head. Richard's eyes flickered with something I couldn't name. And Lily clutched my arm, whispering softly, "We'll get through this, Grandma. We will." But just as the officer was about to speak, the door opened, and in walked Margaret herself. Her face was calm, her hair neatly pinned, her church dress pressed as if she had just come from a service. But when her eyes met mine, I saw it, guilt flickering like a shadow behind the glass. She folded her hands gently in front of her and said, "Eleanor, I came as soon as I heard. We need to talk." And in that moment, I couldn't tell whether I wanted to embrace her for answers or strike her for betrayal. Would you like to hear what Margaret confessed when the walls finally forced her truth out? The air in that small interview room turned so thick, I thought it might choke us all. Margaret stepped in, her perfume faintly floral, just as it had been the last time she hugged me after church. Her steps were slow, deliberate, like a woman walking into her own trial. She didn't even flinch at the sight of Thomas and Julia cuffed to their chairs, nor at Richard leaning in the corner like a watchdog. She looked only at me, her old friend, her eyes heavy with something that was neither sorrow nor defiance, but both. Isn't it strange how a single look can feel like an entire confession? "Eleanor," she said softly, pulling out the chair across from me and sitting down as if she belonged there. "I know you've seen the receipt." She folded her hands neatly, her voice calm, but her fingers trembled just enough to betray her. "Yes, I signed it. Yes, I helped them." The words fell into the silence like stones dropped into a well, and the ripples reached every heart in that room. My throat tightened. "Why, Margaret?" My voice cracked. "Why would you, of all people, do this to me? After everything, after all these years?" I remembered the nights we laughed under the mango tree, the mornings we prayed side by side, the afternoons she helped me mend clothes for the children. My trust in her had been as natural as breathing. And now breathing itself hurt. What price makes a friend turn thief? Her lips pressed together before she spoke again. "Because, Eleanor, I was drowning." She glanced at the officers, then back at me. "My son, Daniel, you know he's sick. The treatments cost more than I could ever afford. The bank was circling me like vultures. And when Thomas came to me, begging, saying it was just paperwork, that you wouldn't be harmed." She shook her head, tears brimming. "I convinced myself it was a small thing. I told myself I was saving my child. I told myself you'd never know." Her tears fell, but instead of softening me, they burned me. "So you saved your son by betraying mine?" I asked, my voice trembling with both fury and grief. "Do you not see what you've done? You've broken the very thing you claim to protect. Family, loyalty, friendship." My chest heaved, my pulse loud in my ears. Do we not all face storms, yet choose different shelters? Why did she choose betrayal instead of faith? Julia chuckled bitterly, her voice cutting through like broken glass. "Oh, spare us the sermon, Eleanor. Margaret did what you should have done long ago. Choose family survival over pride. At least she knows money solves more problems than stubborn dignity." Her smirk widened, venom glistening in her words. Even cuffed, she still struck like a snake. Doesn't evil always find a tongue, even when its hands are bound? "Enough!" barked the older officer, slamming his notebook shut. But the damage was done. My trust in Margaret, already cracked, now shattered. I looked at her, my heart aching. "And did it ease your conscience?" I asked quietly. "Did sleeping on stolen peace cure your son? Or did it only make the sickness grow heavier in your chest?" Margaret's tears flowed freely now, her shoulders shaking. "No," she whispered. "It didn't ease anything. Every night I prayed you'd never find out. Every morning I feared you would. And now here we are." She covered her face with her hands, her sobs filling the small room. But sympathy eluded me. Betrayal, once uncovered, leaves no place for pity. Isn't it true that even the softest heart can turn to stone when trust is murdered? Richard shifted against the wall, his voice low and hard. "So it's true. You let them drag you into this mess, Margaret. I warned them there'd be a price. And here we stand, all paying it." His words struck like the clang of a hammer, final and cold. Thomas finally lifted his head, his eyes red. "Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Please stop this. We can fix it. We can make it right. Don't let them take us all down." His plea reached for me, but I felt nothing but the hollow echo of disappointment. Fix it. Can broken glass ever be reassembled without cutting the hands that try? The younger officer gathered the papers on the table, his jaw tight. "This case is bigger than we thought," he muttered. "Forgery, fraud, conspiracy. We'll need to bring in the bank manager too." "Ma'am," he looked at me, "your testimony will be vital." I nodded slowly, my heart still bleeding. "You'll have it," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside. "Every truth, every detail. I will not let lies win, not this time." My father's voice echoed in my memory, his hand heavy on my shoulder when he gave me the land. "Protect what is yours. The earth doesn't lie, and neither should we." Those words became my anchor in that room full of betrayal. But just as the officers began preparing to take Margaret's statement, the door burst open again. A young man in a suit rushed in, his face pale, his breath quick. He held a folder clutched to his chest as though it contained a beating heart. "Stop everything," he gasped. "There's something you all need to see. Something bigger than just fraud." He dropped the folder on the table, and as it spilled open, photographs slid across the cold metal surface. Photographs of land deeds, bank slips, and hidden contracts. My eyes froze on the one at the top. It wasn't just my land. It wasn't just my house. It was the entire neighborhood. Would you like me to reveal how deep this scheme really went? How my son and his allies weren't just after me, but after everyone who had trusted me as their elder? The photographs spread across the metal table like spilled secrets, each page heavier than stone. I picked one up with trembling hands, and my heart skipped. The documents weren't just mine. They were deeds from neighbors I had known for decades. Old Mr. Crawford's farm, the Johnsons' corner shop, even the little patch of land that the community used for gatherings under the oak tree. All of it had been marked, signed, and falsified with forged papers. The scheme wasn't just about me. It was about swallowing the whole neighborhood. How many roots had their greed already poisoned? The young man in the suit, sweat glistening on his forehead, pointed at the files. "I work at the property records office," he said breathlessly. "We've been tracing unusual filings for months. I thought it was a syndicate, but it all connects back here. To them." He gestured toward Thomas and Julia, his voice tight with urgency. "They've been working with someone inside the county office. It's not just family betrayal, it's organized theft on a massive scale." Gasps rippled through the room. Even the older officer, who had seen too much of human greed, raised his brows. He shuffled through the photos, his eyes narrowing. "This is bigger than we thought," he muttered. "Much bigger." My head swam. I pressed a hand to my chest, my heart racing. "Thomas," I whispered, my voice cracking under the weight of sorrow, "how far were you willing to go? Was I only the beginning?" My son wouldn't meet my eyes. His shoulders shook, his cuffed hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles went white. Julia, ever the serpent, leaned back in her chair with a sly smile. "You make it sound like a crime," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "We were taking what the world never gave us. Those people wasted their land, wasted their chances. We wanted to make something greater. You all cling to dirt while others build empires." Her eyes gleamed with triumph, as if betrayal itself had become her crown. Isn't it terrifying when a person convinces themselves that theft is destiny? Richard stepped forward, slamming his fist on the table so hard the photographs jumped. Empire. You call destroying your own blood an empire. I warned you, Julia. I told you this greed would consume you. His voice thundered through the room, echoing off the walls. But Julia only smirked, her silence more cutting than any words. Margaret sobbed quietly in her seat, her head bowed. I never knew it was this big, she whispered. I swear, Eleanor, I only thought it was your deed, not everyone's. Her tears stained the table, but I couldn't tell if they were born of regret or fear for her own skin. Can one who betrays in small ways truly claim surprise when the betrayal grows monstrous? The younger officer shuffled the folder, pulling out another sheet. Mrs. Hayes, he said gravely, your land was the keystone. It connected all the others. Without it, they couldn't have sold the larger package to developers. That's why they faked your death. That's why your signature mattered most. His words struck me like lightning. My land, the earth my father gave me, the soil I had nurtured with sweat and tears, had been the key that unlocked an entire conspiracy. And my own son had been willing to bury me alive to make it happen. Lily clutched my arm, her small body trembling. Grandma, she whispered, her voice trembling with both fear and determination. They were going to sell the playground too. I heard them say it. My heart shattered anew. The playground, where children's laughter had filled the air, where my husband once carved Lily's initials into the bench. To erase even that. What kind of hearts had my son and his wife hardened into? The older officer closed the folder with a heavy sigh. This is no longer just a family matter. This is a criminal enterprise. Conspiracy to defraud, forgery, attempted land theft on a massive scale. He looked at me with sympathy in his eyes. Ma'am, you've been at the center of this storm, but now we need your help to tear it all down. I straightened slowly, feeling Lily's hand steadying me. My body ached, my heart bled, but something fierce rose within me. Betrayal may break bones, but truth sharpens them into weapons. You will have my help, I said firmly, my voice stronger than I thought possible. I will testify. I will stand. They may have tried to bury me, but I am alive, and I will not let them bury my community. The room grew quiet, the weight of my words settling over every soul. For the first time, Thomas looked directly at me. His eyes wet, his voice barely a whisper. Mom, he said, you don't understand. There are people bigger than us in this. If you fight, they'll come after you too. His warning was trembling, desperate, almost fearful. Were his words a threat or a plea? Before I could answer, the precinct lights flickered. Once. Then the power cut out completely, plunging us into darkness. A moment later, a sound echoed through the corridor outside. A door slamming hard, followed by hurried footsteps and a voice yelling, "They're here!" And in that suffocating dark, a single thought tore through me like a blade. If my son was afraid of someone bigger, then the real puppeteers of this scheme had just arrived. Would you like me to show you what happened when the true masterminds finally stepped out of the shadows? The room plunged into blackness so thick it felt alive, wrapping itself around our throats. Lily gasped and clung to me. The officers cursed under their breath, fumbling for flashlights, their boots scraping against the tile floor. My heart pounded as the sound of footsteps echoed closer, heavy and deliberate, like predators who already knew their prey couldn't escape. Isn't it strange how darkness magnifies fear, making every sound sharper than knives? Then the emergency lights flickered on, dim, red, and sinister. The room was bathed in a glow that made every face look like it was carved from blood. The door burst open, and 3 men in suits strode in. Not uniforms, not police. Men who carried themselves with the arrogance of power and the assurance that no one dared to stop them. The tallest, with a scar slashing down his cheek, looked around the room with a cold smile. "Well," he drawled, his voice smooth as oil but laced with steel, "so this is the old woman who ruined months of planning." His eyes settled on me, and I felt the weight of a hunter sizing up a cornered animal. The officers stepped forward. "This is a secured investigation," the older one barked. "Who are you? You can't just walk in here." But the scarred man laughed, a low, chilling sound. "Oh, officer, we walk in where we please. Don't fool yourself. This little precinct runs on our leash." His hand brushed his suit jacket, revealing the gleam of a pistol tucked at his side. Julia's eyes lit up with relief, her lips curling into a twisted smile. "I told you," she sneered, looking at me. "You're fighting shadows much bigger than us. These are the people who actually make things happen. We were just pawns. You can destroy us, Eleanor, but you'll never touch them." Her voice shook with both fear and triumph. "Isn't it cruel how traitors lean on the very devils who use them?" Thomas's face drained of color. He shrank back in his chair, pulling against the cuffs as though suddenly remembering he had invited wolves into the fold. "You said you wouldn't come here," he stammered, panic lacing his words. The scarred man turned on him sharply, his cold smile fading. "You said you wouldn't get caught. And yet here we are." The younger officer's hand inched toward his holster, but the scarred man caught the motion. "Careful," he said in a voice that froze the air. "You don't want to escalate something you can't finish." The other two men fanned out, blocking the door. The room, already too small, shrank tighter around us. I pulled Lily closer to me, my arms wrapping around her trembling body. My breath shook, but I forced my voice steady. "What do you want?" I asked. My words tasted like iron in my mouth. The scarred man turned his gaze back to me. "Simple," he said, his tone almost casual. "We want what you've always had, the land. Not just yours but all of it. We were building something, Eleanor. A project that would change this whole town. And you, with your stubborn refusal to die quietly, are standing in the way." His eyes gleamed, sharp and merciless. Margaret sobbed quietly in her seat, whispering, "Dear God!" Richard's fists clenched at his sides, his chest heaving with fury. And Thomas, my son, looked like a boy who had set fire to a house only to realize he was still inside it. The scarred man leaned closer, his face inches from mine. "You have two choices," he hissed. "Stay quiet, walk away, and live whatever's left of your years in peace. Or stand against us and watch everything you love burn." His breath smelled of tobacco and arrogance, and his words slithered into my ears like snakes. I met his gaze, refusing to flinch. My whole body trembled, but my voice came out strong. "You think you can scare me? I've buried husbands. I've buried siblings. I've worked land with hands that bled until the soil remembered me. You can kill me, but you will never own me." The room held its breath as the truth cracked through the fear. Isn't it true that even in the darkest rooms, one candle can still blind? For the first time, the scarred man's smile faltered. His eyes narrowed, his jaw tightened. He straightened, adjusting his suit with sharp flicks of his fingers. "So be it," he said flatly. He signaled to the men behind him. One reached for the light switch, plunging the room back into shadows. And in that darkness a shot rang out. The crack of the gun split the air, deafening, violent. Lily screamed. Margaret wailed. The officers shouted, drawing their weapons. My ears rang as I clutched Lily to my chest, my heart hammering like a war drum. When the emergency lights flickered back on, one of the men in suits was on the floor, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping through his jacket. And standing in the doorway, gun raised steady, was someone I never expected to see again, someone whose face I thought belonged to the past. "Would you like me to tell you who pulled that trigger? The person whose return would change everything in ways none of us could have imagined." When the red light flickered back on, my breath caught in my throat. There, framed in the doorway, stood a man I had mourned 25 years ago, my first husband, Henry. His figure was older, his hair now streaked with white, but his stance was unmistakable, steady as the day he first showed me how to plant corn straight. The gun in his hand gleamed under the emergency light, still aimed with deadly precision. For a moment, I thought my mind had betrayed me. I had buried Henry. I had stood over his coffin, wept over his grave, laid flowers with trembling hands. Yet here he was, alive. His chest rising and falling with the calm of someone who had walked through shadows and returned. Was this a ghost, or had the world lied to me all these years? Isn't it cruel how life sometimes resurrects the dead only when your heart is too broken to bear it? The scarred man froze, his arrogance cracking for the first time. "You," he hissed, his voice low with recognition. "You were supposed to be gone." His eyes flicked from Henry to me, then back again, as if trying to rewrite the story playing out in front of him. Henry stepped into the room, lowering his aim but not his guard. "I was gone," he said, his voice gravelly, worn by years of silence. "But when I learned what you were doing to my wife and my land, I came back." His gaze shifted to me, and for a brief moment, the hardness in his eyes softened. "Eleanor, I never meant to leave you. I was forced." His words trembled with truths too heavy for one breath. The room fell into chaos. Officers shouting, Julia gasping in disbelief, Margaret clutching her chest like she'd seen the devil himself. Thomas's face drained of all color, his lips forming a single word. "Father!" The shock in his voice was raw, trembling. He had grown up without Henry, raised only by me. And now, the man he thought long dead stood in front of him like a thunderstorm breaking after years of drought. Richard's fists unclenched, his eyes wide. "Brother," he whispered, his voice breaking. "All these years." His gaze darted between Henry and me, guilt flashing in his eyes. He had known something, maybe not everything, but enough. I would demand his truth later. For now, I couldn't breathe past the storm swelling in my chest. The scarred man's composure snapped back quickly, his lips curling into a snarl. "You think one old man with a gun changes anything? We own this town. We own the papers, the courts, the banks. You can't fight us all." His words carried fire, but his confidence wavered, especially as Henry kept his gun steady, unblinking. Henry's voice was iron. "You've made one mistake too many. You touched my family." The weight of his tone silenced even Julia's sharp tongue. The officers moved swiftly, seizing the moment. They pinned the wounded man to the ground, disarmed the others, and read them their rights. The scarred man resisted, spitting curses, but his power crumbled in that room as handcuffs snapped shut around his wrists. Still, his eyes burned into mine with a promise. "This isn't over." In the corner, Julia twisted violently against her own restraints, her voice shrill. "This can't be happening. You said we'd be untouchable." Her rage spilled out, ugly and desperate. Thomas, meanwhile, sat motionless, his head bowed as tears streamed down his cheeks. For once, he had no excuses, no lies, only the crushing weight of truth pressing him into silence. And there stood Henry, alive, scarred by years I couldn't account for, yet strong, unbroken. My heart warred between fury and longing, betrayal and relief. He had left me to weather storms alone, yet here he was now, shielding me at the very moment my world was collapsing. Could a woman's heart forgive even when it still bled? Lily's small voice broke through the silence, fragile yet steady. "Grandpa," she whispered, her wide eyes fixed on Henry. She had only ever known him through my stories, bedtime tales of a man who worked the land with pride, who sang while sharpening tools, who loved her grandmother fiercely. Now, the legend stood in flesh and blood before her. Henry lowered his weapon at last, his eyes softening as he looked at her. "Yes, child," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. "Grandpa's here now." And for the first time in years, a spark of hope lit Lily's face. But my heart was far from peace. Questions clawed at me. Where had Henry been all these years? Who had forced him to disappear? And what deeper ties did he have to the very men who tried to steal my life and land? Before I could speak, the older officer turned to us, his face grim. "Mrs. Hayes, Mr. Hayes. This case is no longer just about fraud. It's conspiracy, organized crime, and possibly even attempted murder. We'll need full statements. But be warned, the men we've just arrested are only the surface. If they were bold enough to storm a precinct, there are bigger hands pulling the strings. Henry met my eyes, his jaw tightening. He's right, he said. The man behind all of this, the one who forced me into hiding, is still out there. And he won't stop until he takes everything. The room went silent again, the weight of his words pressing down like storm clouds. Bigger than Julia. Bigger than Thomas. Bigger even than the scarred man bleeding on the floor. I gripped Lily's hand, my resolve hardening. They had tried to bury me once, but now I was alive, and I would not stop until the roots of this corruption were torn out completely. But deep inside, another fear twisted like a knife. If Henry had been forced into hiding all these years, then the enemy who held such power over him must be far more dangerous than any of us realized. Would you like me to reveal who that enemy was? The man powerful enough to fake deaths, erase lives, and almost destroy my family. The room seemed to shrink when Henry uttered those words. The man behind all of this, the one who forced me into hiding, is still out there. The officers exchanged wary glances. Margaret let out a strangled sob, and Thomas finally raised his tear-streaked face as though realizing, maybe for the first time, that he too had been a pawn in someone else's cruel game. I looked at Henry, my voice shaking. Who, Henry? Who could force you to vanish for 25 years, to let me bury an empty coffin? Who is this enemy? Henry's jaw clenched. His eyes flickered toward Richard, his younger brother, then back to me. That silence was heavier than thunder. Richard shifted uncomfortably, his fists tightening and loosening by his sides. My heart lurched. Why was he restless under that question? Could my husband's brother, the man who had stood in my house so often, who had sworn to protect our son, have known the truth all along? Henry finally spoke, his voice low like gravel dragged across stone. It was Gerald Whitmore. The name sucked the air out of the room. Even the officers froze. Gerald Whitmore, the wealthy developer who owned half the county, the man whose money touched every bank, every courthouse, every council meeting. His name was whispered in every kitchen, spat out at every town hall debate, but always followed by silence, because no one dared push further. Gerald had built an empire on land that didn't always start as his. Wasn't it said that a man who grows too rich from soil is often guilty of digging graves along the way? Richard cursed under his breath, pacing the room. Julia's eyes lit up in recognition. Gerald, she whispered. He promised us protection. He said no one would dare stand in our way. Her lips twisted into a grin even as she sat cuffed. You can't fight him. None of you can. He owns everything. Thomas shook his head violently. No, that wasn't the deal. He told us it was safe, that no one would get hurt. His voice cracked, his denial desperate. But Julia laughed at him, cruel and bitter. You fool. You thought men like Gerald give without taking. We were pawns, Thomas. Pawns. My stomach turned. Gerald Whitmore. I remembered him well. Years ago he had tried to buy my land, flashing money like bait. When I refused, he smiled with teeth too white, too sharp. He said, "You'll change your mind, Eleanor. Everyone does." But I hadn't. And I see now. That refusal had made me a target. Henry's voice broke into my thoughts, ragged with pain. He came to me first. Told me if I didn't disappear, if I didn't get out of his way, he'd make sure you and Thomas suffered. He staged my accident, paid off men to silence me, and made me watch from the shadows while you carried the burden alone. I stayed hidden, Eleanor, because I thought it was the only way to keep you safe. His eyes glistened, his voice trembling. But Gerald didn't stop. He turned Thomas against his own blood, bought Julia's loyalty with promises, and reached into every corner of this town. The room spun. My knees felt weak. My life, the years of grief, the loneliness, the betrayal, it all traced back to one man who thought the earth was his for the taking. And worse, my own family had become his tools. What kind of power makes even blood turn traitor? The older officer cleared his throat. If Gerald Whitmore is behind this, then you're in greater danger than you realize. We've tried to touch him before. Cases collapse. Witnesses vanish. Evidence disappears. If he knows you're alive and fighting back. He didn't finish. He didn't have to. Lily pressed closer into my side, whispering, "Grandma, don't let him win. Please." Her tiny voice lit a fire in me. My father's land, my husband's blood, my son's soul. Gerald had tried to corrupt them all. But I was still standing. They had not buried me. Not yet. I straightened slowly, meeting the officer's gaze. Then we gather every piece of truth. We tie every knot so tight it cannot be undone. If Gerald Whitmore wants war, he'll have it, but not the way he thinks. This land remembers who plants with greed and who plants with love. And the earth will not lie for him. Henry placed a hand over mine. His grip firm despite the years lost. We'll face him together this time. His voice was steady, but beneath it I heard the tremor of a man who knew Gerald's reach better than anyone. And then, just as resolve settled in my chest, the precinct phone rang. The younger officer answered, his face draining as he listened. He slammed the receiver down and turned to us, eyes wide. "It's Gerald," he said. "He knows you're here, Eleanor. And he's already on his way." The room fell silent, every heart thudding in dread. "Would you like me to show you what happened when Gerald Whitmore finally walked through those doors? The man who held my past, my family, and my land in his fists." The room held its breath as the officer's words settled over us like a storm cloud. Gerald Whitmore is on his way. My heart thumped against my ribs, steady but heavy, as though preparing itself for a war long overdue. Margaret clutched her rosary and whispered frantic prayers under her breath. Richard stood rigid, his jaw tight, his eyes darting toward the door as if bracing for a ghost. Julia, cuffed and cornered, smirked with the confidence of someone who still believed her master would save her. And Thomas, my poor broken son, looked like a man walking barefoot across broken glass, every step bleeding him dry. The sound came first, tires screeching outside, then heavy boots striking pavement in synchronized rhythm. When the precinct door swung open, the temperature seemed to drop. Gerald Whitmore entered not like a man but like a verdict. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a silver mane combed back and a face carved from stone. His presence sucked the air out of the room. His suit was sharp, his tie blood-red, and his smile carried the menace of someone who had built his empire by burying lives. "Well, well," he drawled, his voice smooth as silk dipped in venom. "Eleanor Hayes. Live. That's inconvenient." His cold eyes swept over the room, landing on Thomas and Julia. "And you too. I give you the simplest task. Erase one stubborn old woman, and you fail spectacularly." His voice sharpened on the last word, and Julia flinched despite her bravado. Henry moved to stand in front of me, his jaw set, his gun still within reach. "You've done enough, Whitmore. It ends tonight." Gerald chuckled, slow and mocking. "Henry, my old thorn in the side. I should have finished the job properly all those years ago." His words dripped casually, as though speaking of business deals, not lives torn apart. My stomach twisted, bile rising in my throat. The officers squared their shoulders, blocking Gerald's men from entering further. "Mr. Whitmore, you have no authority here," the older officer barked. "You're under investigation for conspiracy, fraud, and attempted murder." Gerald's laugh echoed coldly. "Investigation." He reached into his jacket, and for a tense second everyone froze, until he pulled out not a weapon but a sleek folder. "Every investigation I don't like disappears," he said flatly, slapping the folder onto the desk. "Judges, bankers, politicians, they're all mine. Do you really think you can hold me here?" But as his arrogance filled the room, a sound cut through, Lily's small voice trembling but fierce. "You can't own Grandma. You can't own us." Her words rang out like a bell in the silence, pure and defiant. Every eye turned to her. She stood clutching my hand, her little chin lifted, her eyes blazing with a courage far too large for her years. Isn't it something how the smallest voice can silence the loudest tyrant? Gerald sneered, his smile twisting. Ah, the grandchild. Strong spirit. Pity she'll inherit nothing when I'm through. His words burned into me, and a fire rose in my chest. Hotter than grief, stronger than fear. I stepped forward, out from behind Henry, my voice clear and unwavering. You're wrong, Gerald. She'll inherit the truth. And the truth will bury you deeper than any coffin you built for others. For the first time I saw it, the flicker of doubt in his eyes. Crack in the mask of untouchable power. He turned sharply as the younger officer pulled out a recorder and pressed play. Gerald's own voice filled the room, captured from the wire one of the arrested men had been wearing. His arrogance, his threats, his orders, all laid bare in his own words. The color drained from his face, his composure faltering. He snapped toward his men. Destroy it. But it was too late. The older officer stepped forward, cuffs ready, his voice like iron. Gerald Whitmore, you're under arrest. Chaos erupted. Gerald lunged, shoving papers, roaring like a beast cornered at last. His men drew weapons, but Henry fired first, his shot splintering the desk and sending them stumbling back. Richard tackled one, the officer subdued the others, and in the frenzy, Gerald found himself slammed against the cold wall. His wrists cuffed, his power slipping away with every click of the steel. Silence followed, heavy and trembling. Gerald glared at me, his eyes promising vengeance even as his empire crumbled. You think you've won, he spat. This town was mine. It will always be mine. I stepped closer, my voice calm, steady, sharp enough to cut. No, Gerald. This land belongs to the people who bled for it, who planted in it, who raised children on it. Men like you only borrow it for a time. And time has run out. As they dragged him away, Julia screamed curses, Thomas wept quietly, Margaret whispered prayers, and Henry finally lowered his gun. Lily hugged me tightly, whispering, You did it, Grandma. But I shook my head softly. No, child. We did it. The truth did it. The precinct buzzed with the aftermath. Papers collected, statements written, the weight of justice finally tipping after years of silence. I stood tall, tired but unbroken, my hand resting on Lily's shoulder. And as the night deepened, I whispered to myself, to my father's memory, to the land itself. They tried to bury me, but I walked in alive. And as long as I breathe, no one will ever steal our roots again. The lesson etched into every heart that night was clear. Greed may build empires, but truth will always outlast them.